The sky was a deep shade of midnight blue, dotted with stars that shimmered above the quiet suburban street like silent spectators. This was the kind of neighborhood where everything seemed perfect: manicured lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, driveways, polished to a sheen. But that perfection was only skin deep. Underneath it all, something had been brewing. And tonight it was about to boil over. Billy Hill didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. It began with a soft hum, mechanical, rhythmic, almost soothing. A sleek gray drone zipped across the rooftops, LEDs blinking blue in the dark. It moved with precision like a hawk on patrol. It was nothing unusual. Billy had ordered from the drone delivery service 100 times. Migraine meds this time. Just something to ease the pounding behind his eyes. He stood in his driveway, watching the sky, the glow from his phone illuminating his face. According to the app, the drone was supposed to be landing any second now. The map showed it hovering near his mailbox, but then the icon stopped. Froze. 2 houses away. Billy's heart tightened. What the hell? He stared into the night, then spotted it, a flicker of movement in the air. The drone was dipping erratically, its trajectory no longer smooth. Beneath it, something dangled. A net. Not just any net, but a long-handled pool net. And holding the handle, standing with the arrogance of someone who'd just bagged a trophy buck, was Mr. Cranston, Billy's next-door neighbor. The man was in his robe, chest puffed out like a cartoon general, eyes gleaming with triumph. "Gotcha," he shouted, waving the net like a gladiator's trident. "No spy drones flying over my yard." Billy blinked in disbelief. "Is this a joke?" The package, the one meant for Billy, was caught in the net, swinging back and forth like bait on a line. Mr. Cranston yanked it free and tucked it under his arm like it was contraband. The drone, now unbalanced, tilted dangerously, clipped a tree branch, and crashed into his backyard with a dull thud. Silence. Not a leaf rustled, not a bird chirped. Billy checked his phone again. Delivery failed. He rushed to the edge of his yard, peered into Cranston's property. Nothing. The old man had vanished inside. Windows dark, curtains drawn, only a flicker of light behind one of the blinds. Billy knocked on his door. No answer. He knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. The only thing left was the final GPS ping. The drone had gone down in Cranston's backyard. Billy returned to his house and opened the security camera footage. His eyes narrowed as he watched it unfold. The drone descending, the net rising, the package vanishing. And there he was, Mr. Cranston, grinning like a man who'd just won a neighborhood war. He uploaded a clip to the neighborhood chat. No accusations, just a question. "Anyone else having drone deliveries intercepted lately?" The response was immediate. Dozens of messages poured in. People had seen it. Some had even filmed it. One blurry photo showed Mr. Cranston hoisting the box like a trophy. Others chimed in. "He thinks every drone is spying on him. He said it's his right to defend his airspace. Last week he threatened a dog walker with a garden rake." Billy's headache pulsed. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was sabotage. Mr. Cranston wasn't just some harmless crank. He was the unofficial enforcer of the HOA, a former Air Force tech turned self-appointed guardian of suburban order. He cited noise ordinances in casual conversation. He measured the distance between trash cans and curbs. He once filed a complaint because a neighbor's garage door creaked too emotionally. And now he'd declared war on drones. Billy didn't yell. He didn't argue. Instead, he opened his garage. Inside sat a prototype, his own drone. Not a delivery model. This one was custom built, reinforced casing, dual rotors, bright LED floodlights, a voice module, and a siren. Billy hadn't planned to use it. Not for this. But sometimes justice came from above. He loaded the voice script, set the coordinates, programmed the flight path. His hands were steady now, his mind clear. This wasn't revenge, it was a statement. That night, Mr. Cranston posted a smug selfie online, Him with the stolen package captioned, "Neighborhood secured, just doing my civic duty." The gall. The next morning, the sun was bright, the air clear, and the neighborhood as peaceful as a painting. Billy sat in his driveway, remote in hand. He waited. Mr. Cranston strutted into his yard with a cup of coffee and a Bluetooth headset, shouting about city permits to someone on the other end. The moment had come. Billy pressed the button. The drone launched, rising like a ghost from behind. His house. Silent. Smooth. It hovered above Mr. Cranston's lawn, casting a sharp shadow on the grass. The old man looked up. His mouth twitched. He took a step back. The drone's speakers crackled. "Mr. Cranston," Billy's voice echoed. "Return the stolen property." The neighbors froze. Heads turned. Phones came out. The siren blared. 10 seconds of pure, high-pitched sound. Windows rattled. Dogs barked. Children stared, slack-jawed. Mr. Cranston shouted something unintelligible, waving his arms like he could swat the machine from the air. But then the drone screen lit up. It played the footage. Him, the net, the theft, the smile. People gasped. One man clapped. A kid shouted, "He stole it!" The drone hovered for a few more seconds, then retreated like a sentinel mission complete. That afternoon, police knocked on Billy's door. He showed them the footage. The officers nodded. Cranston sputtered on his porch, trying to twist the story, but no one was buying it, especially not the cop who'd already seen the footage online. The package was returned. The drone, retrieved from Cranston's shed, was scratched but intact. But the real victory? That came later. Neighbors stopped whispering. They stopped being afraid. Mr. Cranston's next HOA bulletin went unread. His complaints went unanswered. His threats were ignored. The sky belonged to everyone again. And as Billy sat on his porch that night looking up at the stars, a quiet smile crossed his lips. He'd defended his airspace. He'd stood his ground. In a war of silence, his drone had spoken loudest. The days after the confrontation felt like the calm after a storm, a brief moment of peace before the next wave hit. But Billy knew that the battle was far from over. The sky, for the first time in months, felt clear. It felt like his. No more would Mr. Cranston rule the airspace with his petty claims of community safety and drone interception. Billy had made sure of that. But as the days slipped by, something else began to stir. Something that would pull him back into the fight. The neighborhood seemed to be settling into an uneasy silence. The lawns were still pristine. The streets still lined with the same orderly rows of houses. The other neighbors, those who had once whispered about Cranston's antics, now kept to themselves. Maybe they were afraid. Or maybe, just maybe, they had found a new kind of respect for the quiet rebel who had stood up to the self-proclaimed king of the cul-de-sac. Billy wasn't so sure. He sat in his living room, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the floor, and stared at the same security footage he'd watched 100 times. Mr. Cranston had stolen his package. It was clear. But now the question wasn't about what had happened. It was about what would happen next. The old man was stubborn. Billy knew that, but he had to be sure. And then the phone rang. It was the HOA. A voice that Billy immediately recognized. Mrs. Devereaux, the head of the Homeowners Association. She was polite, almost too polite as always. "Billy, dear," she said in her sing-song tone, "I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to check in. It seems there's a bit of, well, tension in the neighborhood, and we thought it best to address it before things escalate any further." Billy's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Devereaux's voice dropped to a softer, almost conspiratorial tone. "Well, you know Mr. Cranston. He's been speaking with some of the other residents. There are concerns about your actions the other day. Some people feel that you've upset the balance, shall we say. They're asking for an official review of your behavior." Billy's heart skipped. He had expected this. He'd known Cranston wouldn't let it go quietly. "What kind of review?" Oh, just a little formal inquiry, Mrs. Devereaux said sweetly. Nothing too serious, just to ensure that, well, things remain orderly. As you know, we pride ourselves on maintaining a peaceful environment here. Billy's pulse quickened. So this is about Cranston? Well, it's about everyone, really, she replied, though Billy could hear the slight hesitation in her voice. But yes, he's brought up some valid concerns, and of course, he's a valued member of the HOA. His experience is, well, invaluable. Billy couldn't believe it. The man had stolen his property and now the HOA was siding with him? It was infuriating, but it wasn't surprising. The HOA had always been a club for the powerful few, and Cranston had been one of its most vocal members for years, I see, Billy said, his voice steady though his mind was racing. Well, I'll be happy to cooperate, but I think it's only fair that you review the footage of the incident. That'll clear everything up, won't it? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Billy could practically hear Mrs. Devereaux calculating her response. Of course, Billy. We'll certainly take everything into consideration. I'm sure this can all be resolved amicably. The line clicked, and she hung up. Billy sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. His mind was already working through the options, his plan forming as quickly as it had when he first decided to stand up to Cranston. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time evening rolled around, Billy was already at the town's old coffee shop, a place he rarely visited, but where he knew the real pulse of the neighborhood could be felt. It wasn't the loudest place, but it was a gathering spot for those who didn't quite fit in with the cookie-cutter ideals of the HOA. The regulars, the ones who still believed in the idea of a community, not just a collection of perfect lawns, sat at the back, nursing cups of coffee and murmuring over the latest neighborhood gossip. Billy joined them, sliding into an empty booth at the corner. A few familiar faces looked up, then returned to their quiet conversations. He ordered a coffee and settled in. He needed allies. It didn't take long. As expected, one of the regulars, Lenny, a man in his 50s who had been living in the neighborhood long before the HOA took control, finally spoke up. You're not the first to go up against Cranston, Lenny said in his gravelly voice. Hell, you won't be the last. He's got a way of making life difficult for folks who don't bow down to him. The HOA, they eat up whatever he tells them. Billy nodded. I figured as much. Lenny leaned in, lowering his voice. But you've got something he doesn't. People are talking he messed with the wrong guy. You keep pushing back and you might just see a few of us step up. Billy's eyes flickered to the other regulars. Lenny was right. There were a lot more people in this town who were tired of Cranston's reign than he'd originally thought. They just needed a spark. Later that night, Billy set to work. He crafted a message, a statement that would hit at the heart of the community's values, calling out the hypocrisy of the HOA and Cranston's behavior. He posted it anonymously on the neighborhood board, along with a few snippets of the footage carefully chosen to show that he wasn't just trying to stir trouble. He was standing up for everyone who had quietly suffered under Cranston's thumb for too long. By the time he woke up the next morning, the response was overwhelming. Neighbors were talking, sharing the message, posting their own stories. The floodgates had opened. Billy could feel the momentum building. This wasn't just about one stolen package anymore. This was about taking back control. It wasn't just his fight anymore. It was the whole neighborhood's. As he sat down at his kitchen table, a thought crossed his mind. This was only the beginning, and Billy Hill was ready for whatever came next. The days following Billy's anonymous post were filled with tension. It was like the calm before a storm, where every whisper in the neighborhood felt charged with anticipation. Billy could feel it in the air, a shift, like the world was on the brink of something big. And deep down, he knew this wasn't just about a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was a battle for control, a fight for the soul of their community. By now, the footage of Cranston's package heist had gone viral, shared by dozens of neighbors, all of them adding their own commentary, their own personal grievances. The neighborhood chat had exploded, not with the usual pleasantries and small talk, but with fiery debates and even outright calls for change. At first, Cranston had tried to dismiss it, calling Billy an attention-seeking troublemaker. He'd taken to the HOA meetings, spinning his version of events, telling everyone that Billy had provoked him, that he was simply protecting the neighborhood from a potential drone invasion. But it wasn't working, not anymore. The power dynamic was shifting, and the HOA, they were scrambling. Billy had become a symbol, a beacon of resistance. A few older residents, who had grown tired of Cranston's iron grip on their lives, reached out to Billy privately, offering their support. They whispered of past injustices, of rules that were enforced with an iron fist, of petty complaints about lawns, fences, and satellite dishes that had made their lives miserable for years. They saw in Billy someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, and they wanted to be part of the change, but the HOA wasn't going down without a fight. Billy's phone buzzed one afternoon with a text from Lenny. It was simple, to the point. The HOA called a meeting. They want to discuss the incident. You're invited. Billy had been expecting this. It was only a matter of time before they tried to bring him in, to make him explain himself, to put him on trial for daring to challenge their authority. He was ready, but what he hadn't expected was how quickly the neighborhood had rallied behind him. The meeting was set for that evening at the local community center, a small building at the end of the block. It had once been the hub of neighborhood events, but lately, it had become a place where Cranston and his loyal followers held court. The walls were lined with HOA-approved decorations, pristine whiteboards listing lawn care schedules, rules for trash can placement, reminders to trim hedges. It was all a little too perfect, a little too controlled. Billy arrived early, his nerves buzzing with excitement. The parking lot was already filled with cars, and a few people were trickling in. As he stepped through the door, he was greeted with a sea of familiar faces. Some he had known for years, others only by reputation. But all of them had one thing in common. They were tired. Tired of Cranston's control. Tired of being told what to do, when to do it, and how to live their lives. He took a seat in the back, his eyes scanning the room. A few of the more vocal opponents to Cranston's reign were already whispering amongst themselves, forming a quiet alliance without speaking a word. And then, at the front, Mr. Cranston himself stood, his arms crossed, and his face twisted into a look of disdain as he surveyed the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," Cranston said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "As most of you know, we are here tonight to discuss an incident that has disturbed the peace of our fine community. An incident that was not only a violation of HOA rules, but an act of defiance against our very way of life." Billy clenched his fists, but stayed silent. This wasn't the time to speak. Not yet. "That's right," Cranston continued, now looking directly at Billy. "One of our own, Billy Hill, has caused quite a stir with his reckless behavior. His actions have disrupted the harmony of our neighborhood and tarnished the reputation we've worked so hard to build." Billy could feel the tension rising in the room. Eyes turned toward him, some curious, some critical. Cranston's supporters were already murmuring, but there was something different this time, an undercurrent of doubt. A few of them exchanged uncertain glances, as though they were no longer entirely sure who the real villain was. Billy took a deep breath and stood up. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in it that couldn't be ignored. "I'd like to say a few words," he said, his eyes locking with Cranston's. "This isn't about one stolen package. This is about something bigger. It's about a neighborhood that's been controlled by fear for too long. It's about a man who's used his position to bully and manipulate people into doing what he wants." The room fell silent. Cranston's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. "I didn't break any laws," Billy continued, his voice gaining strength. "I stood up for myself. I stood up for all of us. And what did I get for it? A threat of punishment from the very people who should be protecting us, who should be looking out for the common good. This is about freedom. This is about our right to live our lives without being constantly watched, judged, or controlled." He paused, letting the words sink in. The atmosphere had shifted. He could feel the tension, but it wasn't directed at him. It was directed at Cranston. Billy, Cranston sneered. You're making a fool of yourself. You're not a hero. You're a troublemaker. But before Cranston could go on, a voice from the back interrupted. It was Lenny, standing up with a firm expression on his face. Actually, Mr. Cranston, Lenny said, his voice ringing out across the room, I think Billy's right. This isn't about one drone. It's about the way you've been running things around here for years. The way you've controlled everything made us all follow rules that nobody agreed to, just because you say so. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. More and more people were standing up, speaking out. The tide was turning. Billy's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. I'm not saying we should throw out all the rules, Lenny continued. But we need to find a balance. We need to stop letting one man make all the decisions. And we need to make sure that what happened to Billy never happens again. The room erupted into applause. Cranston's face turned red with fury, but he couldn't stop it. The people had spoken. His grip on the neighborhood was slipping. For the first time in years, Billy felt a sense of hope. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the whole community coming together and saying, enough is enough. And in that moment, Billy knew that this was only the beginning. The fight was far from over, but now, for the first time, he wasn't alone. The weeks following that fateful HOA meeting were nothing short of electric. The neighborhood, once suffocated under Cranston's authoritarian grip, was buzzing with a newfound sense of freedom. The rebellion against his tyrannical reign had ignited a fire in the community. And now every conversation seemed to revolve around the future of their lives in the neighborhood. Everyone was beginning to realize that they had the power to change things, not just for themselves, but for future generations of residents who would one day live in the homes that now felt like prisons. Cranston, on the other hand, was reeling. For the first time in years, he couldn't control the narrative. The HOA, once his kingdom, had fractured, and he had lost his usual allies. Some of his most loyal supporters were quietly withdrawing from his cause, sensing the shift in the wind. His grip on the neighborhood was slipping faster than he could stop it, and it was starting to dawn on him that this wasn't just a temporary blip. It was the beginning of the end. But Cranston wasn't a man who gave up easily. He was a fighter, and if there was one thing he knew, it was how to manipulate people. He wasn't about to let a few rebellious voices tear down everything he'd built without a fight. It all came to a head when Cranston called a private meeting of the remaining loyalists, those who still believed in his cause. The goal was clear: reclaim control, take back the neighborhood, and punish Billy and anyone else who dared to challenge him. It was his last desperate attempt to cling to the power that had defined his life for so long. The meeting was held at his house, an imposing mansion at the end of the street that loomed like a fortress over the rest of the neighborhood. Billy had never been inside. But now, as he walked toward the front door with Lenny by his side, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This was the heart of the beast, the place where it all started. Billy rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest. The door swung open, revealing Cranston's wife, her face tight with tension as she greeted them with a forced smile. "Billy, Lenny," she said, her voice colder than the evening air. "Cranston is expecting you." They stepped inside, and the smell of expensive cologne and freshly polished wood filled the air. The grand staircase curled upward, and the walls were adorned with trophies and awards that seemed to boast of Cranston's success and power. It was a place of intimidation, designed to make anyone feel small. Cranston was waiting for them in the living room, a glass of scotch in hand as he sat in a leather chair, his posture straight and rigid. His expression was one of cold calculation, the face of a man who had nothing left to lose. "So we meet again, Billy," he said, his voice low but dripping with venom. "I hope you're ready for what comes next." Billy squared his shoulders, not allowing Cranston's words to shake him. "What are you going to do, Cranston? Send me another package? Or is it something bigger this time?" Cranston's lips twisted into a smile, but there was no humor in it. "I didn't want it to come to this, but it seems you've forced my hand." He stood up, walking over to a cabinet where he poured himself another drink. "You've ruined everything. You've turned my supporters against me. And now you think you can just walk away from this? Billy stood his ground, his gaze steady. It's not about ruining you, Cranston. It's about giving people their power back. People are tired of living under your thumb. It's time for a change. Cranston's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. He turned toward Billy, his eyes narrowing. You think you're the hero of this story, don't you? He spat. Well, let me remind you that heroes don't win in the end. They never do. Lenny, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. It's not about winning, Cranston. It's about doing what's right. For a moment, Cranston didn't respond. He stood there, silently seething, his fists clenched. Then, without warning, he lunged toward the table, sweeping the glass of scotch off and sending it crashing to the floor. You think you're better than me? Cranston yelled, his voice rising. You think the rules don't apply to you? You think you can just tear down everything I've worked for? Billy didn't flinch. You've built this on lies, on fear, on manipulation. It's not real, Cranston. And that's why it's falling apart. For a long moment, Cranston stood there, staring at Billy, the weight of his defeat settling over him. It was as if the last few months had finally caught up with him. He was no longer the man in charge, no longer the one pulling the strings. And then, in a moment that no one expected, Cranston let out a low, bitter laugh. You're right. I've been so focused on controlling everything I didn't see what was right in front of me. He turned away, his back to them as he ran a hand through his hair. I was never meant to lead. I just wanted to be in charge. Lenny took a step forward, his voice softer now. It's not too late, Cranston. You can change. You don't have to keep fighting this. But Cranston shook his head, the weight of his own failures pressing down on him. I've already lost, haven't I? Billy nodded slowly. Maybe, but it doesn't have to be the end. You can step down, let someone else take over. You don't have to keep fighting this. For the first time, Cranston didn't argue. He just stared at the floor, the heavy silence in the room louder than any words. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse. I'll think about it. The following days were a blur. Word quickly spread through the neighborhood that Cranston had officially resigned from his position as HOA president. The news was met with mixed reactions, some in disbelief, others in quiet celebration. But the most important thing was that the oppressive atmosphere had begun to lift. The fear, the manipulation, the control, it was all starting to fade away. Billy had won. Not through force, not through violence, but through persistence and the strength of the people who had come together to stand up for what was right. He had shown the neighborhood that it was possible to fight back against those who tried to take away their freedom. But even with Cranston's resignation, Billy knew that the battle wasn't truly over. There would always be people like him, those who sought power for the sake of it, those who wanted to control others. But Billy also knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up, to fight for what was right, change would always be possible. And as he walked through the streets of the neighborhood, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time it felt like the neighborhood was finally free. In the aftermath of Cranston's resignation, the neighborhood began to rebuild, brick by brick, with a sense of unity that had been missing for years. Without his oppressive rule, the residents slowly regained their confidence. The HOA was restructured, this time with an elected board that truly represented the community's diverse voices. No longer would a single individual wield unchecked power. Billy, though hesitant at first, was asked to join the new board. He had become a symbol of hope, and the people wanted his leadership to guide them through this transition. It was a reminder that even in the quietest of suburbs, the fight for justice could start with just one person's willingness to stand up. The next few months brought about significant changes. Gardens flourished, kids played freely without fear of arbitrary rules, and neighbors, once wary of each other, began to interact as a real community. Cranston's mansion, once a symbol of fear, became a place where the community held gatherings, transforming it into a shared space. Billy sat on his porch one evening, watching the sunset. The sky above was no longer a realm of control, but of freedom. The battle for their homes had been long, but the war for their community had just begun. And in that new dawn, there was hope, unity, and the promise of a future built by everyone together.